I never expected 3 words at my own wedding to shatter my entire world. "You're not my daughter," my mother hissed, venom dripping from her voice as I stood frozen in my wedding dress. Everyone thought it was just wedding day drama, but I knew better. I had the DNA test results in my clutch that would prove she was absolutely right. I wasn't her daughter, and what I did next made my entire family fall to their knees. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my wedding day began like something out of a fairy tale. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the bridal suite, casting prisms of color across the polished wood floor. My bridesmaids fluttered around me, adjusting my veil, touching up makeup, and popping champagne like we didn't have a care in the world. My best friend Mia was carefully pinning tiny pearl hairpins into my updo when I caught a glimpse of my mother in the mirror. She stood in the doorway, her silk mother-of-the-bride dress impeccably tailored to her slender frame. The dusty rose color complemented her ash blonde hair, which was swept into an elegant chignon. But something was off. Instead of tears of joy or a proud smile, her face was taut with tension, lips pressed together so tightly they'd nearly disappeared. "Could you all give us a minute?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The girls exchanged glances but filed out without question, champagne flutes still in hand. As the door clicked shut behind them, the air in the room seemed to thicken. "You look beautiful, Elena," my mother said, but the words fell flat, like reciting lines from a script she hadn't bothered to rehearse. "Thank you," I replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my dress. "I was worried you weren't going to make it." She walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. "I almost didn't." My heart sank. For 28 years, I'd been chasing her approval like it was water in a desert. Even now, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I was still that little girl desperate for her to notice me. "Why?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Because of this," she said, holding it out between 2 manicured fingers like it was contaminated. "I found it in your father's study last week. I didn't need to take it. I knew exactly what it was. The same document I had a copy of tucked into my own wedding clutch. The truth I discovered 3 months ago that had been eating me alive ever since." "So you know," I said quietly, "that you went behind our backs, that you did a DNA test without telling us, that you've been lying to our faces for months?" Each question felt like a slap. "Yes, Elena, I know." I turned back to the mirror, needing a moment to compose myself. In the reflection, I could see us both, me in ivory lace, her in rose silk, looking like the perfect mother-daughter portrait. What a convincing lie we'd been living. "I had a right to know," I finally said. "I've had questions my whole life. Why I don't look like you or Dad, why there are no baby pictures of me before 6 months. Why you flinch every time someone says how much I look like Aunt Sarah. Those were not your questions to ask," she snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "Some things are private, Elena. Some things are meant to stay buried. Like the fact that I'm not your biological daughter?" I said, finally turning to face her directly. "That's not something small, Mom. That's my entire identity." She recoiled as if I'd struck her. "We gave you everything. The best schools, dance lessons, summer camps, a beautiful home. We loved you as our own." "As your own?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "But I never was I?" "This is exactly why we never told you," she said, shaking her head. "We knew you'd react like this, make it all about you and your feelings, with no consideration for what we've sacrificed." My laugh was hollow. "Sacrificed? You've been living a lie. And making me live it too without even knowing." Outside, I could hear the string quartet beginning to play. Guests would be arriving, finding their seats, flipping through programs with my name and my fiancé, dus embossed in silver foil. A name that wasn't even rightfully mine. "I won't have you ruin this family," my mother said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Not today. Not ever. You will walk down that aisle, marry that boy, and we will never speak of this again. Do you understand me? Quote, for a moment, I saw red. Every slight, every dismissal, every time she'd made me feel like I wasn't enough. It all made perfect sense now. I wasn't enough. I wasn't hers. No, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I don't understand you at all. And I don't think I ever have. A sharp knock at the door broke the tension. 15 minutes, ladies, called the wedding planner's cheerful voice. My mother straightened, composing herself with practiced ease. We're done here, she said, moving toward the door. I expect you to do the right thing. As her hand reached for the knob, I couldn't help myself. Mom, I called after her. Just tell me one thing. Who are my real parents? She froze, her back to me, shoulders rigid beneath the silk. For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Then she turned, her face a mask of ice. As far as anyone is concerned, we are your real parents, she said. But if you insist on pushing this, remember, I can just as easily stand up in that church and tell everyone that you're not my daughter. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like the end of everything. I stood alone in the bridal suite, the weight of her threat pressing down on me like a physical thing. She wouldn't really do it, would she? Announce to our 200 guests, to Daniel's family, to our friends, that I wasn't really Elena Blackwood? But something in her eyes told me she would. If pushed, my mother would burn it all down rather than let the perfect image she'd cultivated be tarnished. I glanced at the clock. 12 minutes until I was supposed to walk down the aisle. 12 minutes to decide what to do with a truth that could destroy everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My hands trembled as I opened my clutch and pulled out my own copy of the DNA test results. I'd ordered it on a whim after finding an old photograph in my father's desk. A woman who looked so much like me it was uncanny, but who I'd never seen before. The name Catherine was scrawled on the back with a date from 30 years ago. When I'd asked my father about it, his face had gone pale, and he'd snatched it away, claiming it was an old college girlfriend. Something in his reaction had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. 3 weeks later, when the results came back showing I had no genetic connection to either Margaret or Richard Blackwood, that seed had blossomed into a terrible certainty. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Mia poked her head in, her expression concerned. Everything okay in here? Your mom looked intense when she left. I forced a smile. Just pre-wedding jitters. She didn't believe me. Best friends rarely do. But she played along. Well, your dad's waiting outside. It's almost time. My father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cried when I got accepted to Columbia, who had held my hand through every heartbreak and triumph. Not my father at all, according to science. I'll be right there, I promised. When she left, I tucked the DNA results back into my clutch. The quartet had transitioned to Pachelbel's canon, the signal that the bridal party was beginning their procession. In less than 5 minutes, I was expected to appear on my father's arm, ready to walk toward my future. I stared at my reflection one last time. My dark hair and olive skin had always been attributed to a distant Italian grandmother on my father's side. Another lie, apparently. Who was I really? Whose blood ran through my veins? What family medical history should I be concerned about? What genetic traits might I pass on to my own children someday? Daniel and I had talked about kids. We'd even picked out names. Would he still want that future if he knew I wasn't who I'd always thought I was? Another knock, firmer this time. Elena? Sweetheart, it's time. My father's voice, warm and familiar. I opened the door to find him standing there in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly combed, his kind blue eyes, so unlike my brown ones, crinkling at the corners as he smiled. You look stunning, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Dad, I began, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I confront him now, minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. But how could I not? He must have seen something in my face because his smile faltered. "What's wrong?" "Mom found the DNA test," I said quietly. The color drained from his face. For a moment he looked every bit of his 62 years, and then some. "Elena, I can explain." "Not now." I cut him off, suddenly aware of the wedding planner hovering nearby, of the music playing, of 200 people waiting. "But we will talk about this. All of it." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Of course. Whatever you want to know. But please, can we get through today first?" Part of me wanted to demand answers right then and there. But another part, the part that had spent 28 years loving this man as my father, couldn't bear to shatter his heart moments before he was supposed to walk me down the aisle. "Okay," I agreed. After the ceremony, relief washed over his face as he offered me his arm. "Thank you." As we positioned ourselves at the entrance to the church, I tried to focus on what lay ahead. Daniel, the man I loved, waiting for me at the altar. Our friends and family gathered to celebrate the beautiful future we'd planned together. But as the wedding march began and the doors swung open, I caught sight of my mother in the front row. Her spine was ramrod straight, her expression a perfect mask of maternal pride. Only I could see the warning in her eyes as they locked with mine. One step, then another. My father's arm was steady beneath my hand as we began our slow procession down the aisle. People smiled. Cameras flashed. Everything looked perfect on the surface. Each step brought me closer to Daniel, whose face lit up as he saw me. The love in his eyes was so pure, so complete, it made my chest ache. He had no idea the storm brewing beneath the calm exterior of our families. We were halfway down the aisle when I saw her. A woman seated in the back row, partly hidden behind a tall cousin of Daniel's. She wasn't supposed to be there. She hadn't been on the guest list. But I recognized her instantly from the photograph I'd found in my father's desk. Catherine, older now, with streaks of silver in her dark hair, but unmistakably the woman from the picture. And unmistakably like looking in a mirror of my future self. My steps faltered. My father's hand tightened on mine, steadying me. "Keep going," he whispered. "Almost there." But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the woman. She was watching me with an intensity that seemed to reach across the crowded church and touch me physically. In her gaze was a lifetime of longing, of missed moments, of questions that mirrored my own. My real mother had come to my wedding. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled, nearly tripping on my train. A collective gasp rose from the guests. My father's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "Elena," he hissed, "pull yourself together." But I couldn't. My eyes darted from Catherine to my mother to Margaret in the front row. Margaret's face had gone rigid with fury as she followed my gaze to the back of the church. She knew exactly who had dared to show up. As we reached the altar, my father placed my hand in Daniel's with the traditional gesture of giving away the bride. Daniel's fingers were warm and steady around mine, but I barely felt them. My entire body had gone numb. The minister began the ceremony, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Daniel squeezed my hand gently, drawing my attention back to him. His eyes were questioning, concerned. I tried to smile reassuringly, but I could feel it wobble at the edges. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Margaret had risen from her seat and was making her way toward the back of the church, her movements stiff with barely contained rage. She was heading straight for Catherine. Panic surged through me. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. "I need a minute," I whispered to Daniel, dropping his hand. Before anyone could react, I gathered my skirts and hurried back down the aisle, ignoring the murmurs of surprise from the guests. I reached them just as Margaret confronted Catherine in the vestibule. "You have no right to be here," Margaret was saying, her voice low but venomous. "This is a private ceremony." Catherine stood her ground, dignified despite the attack. "I have every right to see my daughter on her wedding day." "She is not your daughter," Margaret hissed. "You gave up that right 28 years ago." "Stop it," I said, my voice cutting through their confrontation. "Both of you, just stop." They turned to me, identical expressions of surprise on their very different faces. "Elena," Catherine breathed, taking a step toward me. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I had to see you. Margaret moved between us like a shield. Go back to the altar, Elena. I'll handle this. No, I said firmly. I don't think you will. The doors to the church had opened behind me, and I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on my back. Daniel had followed me along with my father. The whispers were growing louder. What's happening? Daniel asked, coming to stand beside me. Elena, who is this woman? I looked at him, this man I loved, who deserved nothing but honesty from me. Then I looked at Catherine, the stranger who shared my blood, and at Margaret and Richard, the people who had raised me as their own, however imperfectly. 28 years of lies were about to come crashing down. And I was the one holding the match. She's my mother, I said, my voice clear and steady despite the chaos in my heart. My biological mother. The vestibule went silent. Daniel's face registered shock, then confusion. What are you talking about? Margaret stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. Elena, stop this nonsense right now. We are not doing this here. We are, I insisted, standing my ground. I'm done with the secrets and the lies. I deserve to know the truth, and so does everyone else who cares about me. I turned to the growing crowd of bewildered guests. My father had pushed his way to the front, his face ashen. 3 months ago, I found out that the people I've called Mom and Dad my entire life are not biologically related to me. I announced, my voice surprisingly steady. They've known this all along but chose to keep it from me. Today, at my wedding, my mother, I gestured to Margaret, threatened to publicly announce that I'm not her daughter if I didn't keep quiet about it. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face had gone white with fury. You ungrateful little, she began, but my father cut her off with a hand on her arm. That's enough, Margaret, he said quietly. Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. Elena, please, this isn't how we wanted this to come out. How did you want it to come out, Dad? I asked, the word feeling strange on my tongue now. After another 28 years? Or never? Catherine stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, as if physically restraining herself from reaching for me. Elena, I never meant to cause this kind of scene. I just wanted to see you, to be in the same room as you on your special day. I should go. No, I said firmly. Don't go. I have questions. So many questions. Daniel moved closer to me, his warmth a stabilizing presence at my side. Maybe we should postpone the ceremony, he suggested quietly. Give you time to sort this out. I looked up at him, searching his face for signs of anger or betrayal. There were none, only concern and unwavering support. In that moment, I loved him more than I ever had. Are you sure? I asked, knowing what a logistical nightmare it would be to reschedule, to explain to everyone. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm sure about you, Elena. The rest is just details. Tears pricked at my eyes, the first I'd allowed myself since this whole ordeal began. Thank you, I whispered. Turning back to the expectant crowd, I took a deep breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to announce that the wedding will be postponed. I've just discovered some family matters that need to be addressed before Daniel and I can move forward with our lives together. Please enjoy the reception. The food and music are all paid for, after all. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. And thank you for your understanding. As people began to disperse, some to the reception hall, others simply leaving in confusion, I found myself standing in a small circle with the 4 people at the center of my fractured identity. Daniel, the man who would be my husband, Richard and Margaret, the people who had raised me, and Catherine, the woman who had given birth to me. I think, I said, looking at each of them in turn, that we have a lot to talk about. We convened in a small private room off the church vestibule. The wedding planner had ushered us there with impressive efficiency, recognizing a family crisis when she saw one. The room was meant for the pastor's preparations, a simple space with a wooden desk, a few chairs, and a small window that cast rectangles of colored light across the floor from the stained glass outside. Daniel had quickly informed the guests that the ceremony was postponed, but that everyone should proceed to the reception venue to enjoy the celebration. It was a gracious move that spared me from having to face 200 confused faces. "I'll be just outside if you need me," he said, squeezing my hand before closing the door. Even in crisis, he knew when to give me space. It was one of the countless reasons I loved him. The silence in the room was suffocating. Margaret sat rigidly in a chair by the desk, her posture perfect even in distress. Richard stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder in what looked more like restraint than comfort. Catherine hovered uncertainly near the door, as if prepared to flee at any moment. And me? I stood in the center of the room in my wedding dress, feeling like an actress who had wandered onto the wrong stage. "I think," I said finally, breaking the silence, "that I deserve the whole truth. From all of you." Richard was the first to speak. "You're right, Elena. You do." His voice was tired, defeated. "We should have told you years ago." "Told me what, exactly?" I pressed. "That I'm adopted? That you've been lying to me my entire life?" "It's not that simple," Margaret cut in, her voice sharp. "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty straightforward." Richard sighed heavily. "You're not adopted. Not technically. It's more complicated than that." I looked to Catherine, who had remained silent. "Are you my biological mother?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "Yes. And my biological father?" A heavy pause filled the room. Catherine's gaze flickered to Richard, and my stomach dropped. "No," I whispered, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. "You're my father? My actual father?" Richard's face crumpled. "Yes." The room spun around me. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "So you had an affair," I said, my voice hollow. "And I was the result." "It wasn't an affair," Catherine said quietly. "Not exactly." Margaret made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. "Of course you'd say that." "It's the truth," Catherine insisted. "Richard and I were together before he met you, Margaret. We were engaged." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. I turned to Richard. "You were engaged to her? And you never thought to mention this small detail?" He looked miserable. "It was a different time in my life, Elena. I was young, just finishing law school. Catherine and I had plans, but then..." "Then what?" I prompted when he trailed off. "Then I got pregnant," Catherine said simply. "And Richard's family made it very clear that I wasn't suitable to be a Blackwood." I turned back to Richard, disbelief washing over me. "You left her because your family didn't approve? Because she was pregnant with me?" "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "There was pressure, yes, but it was mutual. We agreed it wouldn't work." "We didn't agree to anything," Catherine said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Your father threatened to cut you off from the family fortune, from your position at the firm, and you chose money over us." "That's not fair," Richard began, but Catherine wasn't finished. "You know what's not fair? Watching the man you love marry someone else 3 months after he promised to spend his life with you. Having his child growing inside you while he builds a new life without you. That's not fair." The raw pain in her voice silenced everyone. For the first time, I saw my mother, Margaret, look uncertain, her carefully constructed narrative beginning to crack. "If that's true," I said slowly, "then how did I end up with them? Did you give me up for adoption?" Catherine shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, I never wanted to give you up. I had every intention of raising you myself." "Then what happened?" She took a deep breath. "I had complications during the delivery. I hemorrhaged badly. They didn't think I would make it. I was unconscious for days after you were born." I looked to Richard. "And you stepped in?" He nodded slowly. "When I heard Catherine was in critical condition, I went to the hospital. I saw you in the nursery. You were so tiny, so perfect. I knew immediately you were mine. So you just took me?" The horror of it was almost too much to comprehend. "No." Richard looked genuinely shocked. "I would never..." "We thought Catherine might die. Her parents were elderly, unable to care for a newborn. There was talk of you going into foster care until she recovered. if she recovered. So we offered to take you, Margaret said, speaking up at last. Temporarily at first. Just until Catherine was back on her feet. But you never gave me back, I said, the pieces falling into place. When she recovered, you kept me. A heavy silence fell over the room. Margaret's jaw was tight, her eyes avoiding mine. Is that what happened? I pressed, looking between them. Did you steal me from my mother? They didn't steal you, Catherine said quietly. They leveraged the system against me. What does that mean? It means, she continued, that by the time I was well enough to come for you, they had filed for emergency custody. They claimed I was unfit, that my medical condition made me unable to care for you properly. They had the best lawyers, the best doctors willing to testify. I was a 23-year-old kindergarten teacher with mounting medical bills. I didn't stand a chance. The unfairness of it all hit me like a physical blow. You fought for me? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Every day for 3 years. I appealed. I scraped together money for lawyers. I begged the courts to reconsider. But the Blackwoods are a powerful family, and I was just me. I turned to Margaret and Richard, fury building inside me. How could you do that? How could you keep a child from her mother? Margaret's eyes flashed. We gave you everything, the best of everything. Do you think she could have provided what we did? Private schools? Dance lessons? Summer in Europe? I would have given her love, Catherine said simply. Honesty. The word hung in the air between us. When did you stop fighting? I asked Catherine, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. If she had truly wanted me, how could she have given up? Pain flashed across her face. I never stopped fighting, Elena. Not really. But after 3 years of court battles that were draining every resource I had, your father came to me with a proposal. I looked to Richard, whose face had gone ashen. What kind of proposal? He couldn't meet my eyes. I offered Catherine a settlement. A significant amount of money, in exchange for relinquishing her parental rights. The betrayal was so profound I could barely breathe. You bought me? No. Richard looked horrified. It wasn't like that. We believed we were doing what was best for you. You were 3 years old. You knew us as your parents. The court battles were creating instability. You thought you could throw money at the problem and it would go away. I finished for him. And I refused, Catherine said firmly. I told him I would never sign away my rights to you, no matter how much money he offered. I looked at her with new respect. Then what happened? Catherine's eyes hardened as she looked at Richard. Tell her what you did. Richard seemed to age before my eyes, his shoulders slumping under an invisible weight. I threatened her, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I told her if she didn't sign the papers, I would make sure she never saw you again, that we would move you out of the country if necessary. You had no legal right, Catherine said, her voice trembling with old anger. But you had all the power. So you signed, I said to Catherine, the final piece clicking into place. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. With one condition, that they tell you the truth when you were old enough to understand. That they allow me to have some contact with you, even if you didn't know who I really was. I spun to face Margaret and Richard. And did you honor that condition? The guilty silence was answer enough. We meant to tell you, Richard said weakly, when you were 18, then when you finished college. But the time never seemed right. The time was right 20 years ago. I snapped. The minute I was old enough to understand what adoption meant. But you weren't adopted, Margaret said, as if this technicality somehow absolved them. Legally, we are your parents. Because you manipulated the system, I was shouting now, years of unaddressed suspicions and questions boiling over. You used your money and influence to steal someone else's child. We raised you, Margaret shot back, rising from her chair. We changed your diapers, nursed you through fevers, helped with your homework. That woman, she jabbed a finger toward Catherine, she wasn't there for any of it. Because you wouldn't let her be. I was trembling with rage now. You kept her from me. Catherine stepped forward, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. Elena, I don't want you to think I abandoned you. After I signed those papers, I moved to Boston to start over. But I never stopped thinking about you, wondering who you were becoming. If you signed away your rights, how did you know where to find me today? I asked, suddenly curious. How did you know I was getting married? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I've been following your life from a distance. Your father allowed me that much, at least. I've seen your graduation photos, read about your achievements in the alumni newsletter. I saw your engagement announcement in the Times. I turned to Richard. You knew she was watching from afar? All this time? He nodded slowly. I sent her updates occasionally. School photos, news clippings. It seemed cruel to cut her off completely. But not cruel to keep her existence a secret from me? The hypocrisy was staggering. We thought we were protecting you, Margaret insisted. Children need stability, not confusion about who their parents are. That wasn't your decision to make, I said firmly. It was mine. It's my life, my identity, my truth. And now you know, Richard said quietly. For better or worse, now you know everything. I looked around at these three people who had shaped my existence in such profound and contradictory ways. Margaret, who had raised me but always kept me at arm's length emotionally. Richard, who had loved me as a father but betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way. And Catherine, the stranger who shared my blood, who had fought for me and lost. Not everything, I said finally. I still don't know why you're here today, I addressed Catherine directly. After all this time, why come forward now? She took a deep breath. Because I'm moving to London next month for work, a 2-year contract. Before I left, I needed to see you one more time, even if just from a distance. I never intended to approach you or cause a scene. I just wanted to see my daughter on her wedding day. But I recognized you, I said, remembering the jolt of familiarity when I'd seen her in the church. Yes. She smiled sadly. You have my eyes. My mother's eyes, actually. The weight of all I'd lost, generations of connections, family histories, shared traits, hit me all at once. An entire maternal lineage had been kept from me. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the moment. Daniel peeked in, his expression concerned. Everything okay in here? Some of the guests are starting to leave. The reality of my abandoned wedding came rushing back. 200 people were waiting at a reception venue for a ceremony that hadn't happened. Thousands of dollars in flowers, food, and music were going to waste while I sorted through the wreckage of my family history. I need to go address the guests, I said, suddenly exhausted. This conversation isn't over, but it needs to pause. Elena, Margaret began, but I cut her off with a raised hand. I can't process any more right now. I need time. Richard nodded, looking relieved at the reprieve. Of course, whatever you need. I turned to Catherine, who was watching me with those eyes so like my own. Would you come to the reception? I'd like to talk more, just not about all of this right now. Hope bloomed across her face. I'd be honored. Good. I smoothed down my wedding dress, squaring my shoulders. Daniel, could you ask the wedding planner to have the car brought around? We should get to the venue. He nodded, giving my hand a supportive squeeze before disappearing to make arrangements. As we prepared to leave, Margaret stepped in front of me, her face tight with barely controlled emotion. Elena, you can't possibly be thinking of including her in the reception. What will people think? For the first time in my life, I looked at my mother, the woman who had raised me, and felt nothing but pity. They'll think I'm getting to know a family friend, I said coolly, unless you'd prefer I tell them all the truth. The threat hung in the air between us. Margaret's face paled, but she stepped aside without another word. As we walked out of the church, I felt oddly lighter, despite the chaos of the day. The truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. And with it came the freedom to decide for myself what happened next. Daniel met me at the church entrance, offering his arm with a reassuring smile. Ready? I glanced back at the three people following us, my complicated, fractured family, and then looked ahead to the man who would be my partner through whatever came next. Ready, I confirmed, stepping forward into an uncertain but honest future. The reception venue was a blur of concerned faces and whispered questions. Daniel and I moved through the crowd together, offering the simplified explanation that we'd decided to postpone the ceremony, but wanted everyone to enjoy the celebration we'd planned. Sometimes life throws you curveballs, Daniel told his confused relatives with easy charm. But the party's still on, and we're still madly in love. Just consider this a very expensive engagement party. His ability to smooth things over was one of his many gifts, and I was profoundly grateful for it, as I tried to process the seismic revelations of the day. Catherine kept a respectful distance, settling at a table near the back with some of Daniel's more distant relatives, who didn't know enough about me to question her presence. Occasionally, I would catch her watching me, her expression a mixture of wonder and sadness that made my chest ache. Margaret and Richard arrived late, having clearly taken time to compose themselves. They moved through the room with practiced social grace, offering vague explanations about family matters that needed resolving before the ceremony could proceed. No one questioned them too deeply. The Blackwoods were not the kind of people one pressed for details. As the afternoon wore on, the initial awkwardness began to fade. The excellent food and flowing champagne worked their magic, and soon people were dancing, laughing, and generally enjoying themselves despite the unusual circumstances. I was taking a moment alone by the windows, watching the sunset cast golden light across the garden, when Catherine approached tentatively. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Please," I said, indicating she should sit. Up close, the resemblance between us was even more striking. We had the same high cheekbones, the same slight wave to our dark hair. "This is a beautiful venue," she said after a moment. "You have excellent taste." "Thank you," I smiled despite myself, though I can't take all the credit. Daniel's mother is an interior designer. She helped a lot. "He seems like a wonderful man." "He is." I glanced across the room to where Daniel was chatting with my bridesmaids, making them laugh despite the tension of the day. The best I've ever known. We sat in silence for a moment, both watching the celebration unfold before us. "I don't know what to call you," I said finally. "Catherine seems too formal, but Mom doesn't feel right either." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Catherine is fine for now. Or Kate, if you prefer. We have time to figure out what feels comfortable." "Do we?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You said you're moving to London." "I am." She hesitated, then added, "But planes exist. And phones. And if you wanted to, if you were open to it, I'd very much like to get to know you, Elena. On whatever terms you're comfortable with." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a woman trying to insert herself into my life for her own purposes. This was a mother who had lost her child and never fully recovered from that wound. "I'd like that too," I admitted, surprising myself with how true it felt. "I have so many questions." "I bet you do." She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners just like mine did. "And I'll answer every single one, I promise." From across the room, I noticed Margaret watching us, her face a mask of barely concealed distress. For a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt. Whatever her faults, she had been the only mother I'd known for 28 years. As if reading my thoughts, Catherine followed my gaze. "This must be very difficult for her," she said quietly. "For all her faults, I believe she loves you in her way." The compassion in her voice for the woman who had taken her child surprised me. "You're being very understanding." Catherine shrugged. "I've had 28 years to process my anger. And in some ways, I understand her actions, even if I can't forgive them. The desire to protect what you love can make people do terrible things." Her wisdom and grace in the face of such profound injustice moved me deeply. I wondered what kind of person I might have become had I been raised by this woman instead. "Tell me about yourself," I said impulsively. Not the big dramatic story, we'll get to that, but the everyday things. What do you do? What do you love? What makes you laugh? Her face lit up at the invitation. I'm a professor of art history now. I teach at Wellesley College. I specialize in Renaissance women artists, the ones history tried to forget. That's remarkably appropriate, I said with a small smile. She laughed, and the sound was so familiar it made my heart ache. Had I inherited my laugh from her too? I love old movies, particularly film noir. I have a cat named Dorian who's probably destroying my apartment as we speak. I make terrible pancakes but excellent pasta. I collect vintage postcards. I'm afraid of heights but love roller coasters, which makes no sense at all. Each small detail was a gift, a piece of the puzzle of my own identity that I hadn't known was missing. Your turn, she said gently. Tell me something about you that I wouldn't know from alumni newsletters. I thought for a moment. I sleep with one foot outside the covers, even in winter. I can't stand the smell of bananas. I cry at commercials, but never at actual sad movies. I wanted to be a veterinarian until I fainted during a field trip to an animal hospital in 3rd grade. She absorbed each detail with visible delight, as if memorizing them. You get the foot thing from me, she said with a smile. My mother used to tease me about it. Quote, my grandmother, I said wonderingly. Tell me about her. She was wonderful, tough as nails but so loving. She taught high school English for 40 years. She would have adored you. Is she? She passed away 10 years ago. Catherine's eyes clouded with sadness. I wish you could have known her. The weight of all I had lost, all that had been taken from me, settled heavily on my shoulders. An entire maternal family, generations of connections and stories and shared traits, had been kept from me. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared at our table, champagne flutes in hand. Sorry to interrupt, he said, offering us each a glass. But they're about to serve the cake, and I thought you might want something to toast with. I introduced them properly, watching as they shook hands. Daniel, this is Catherine, my biological mother. If the situation fazed him at all, he didn't show it. It's a pleasure to meet you, Catherine. I can see where Elena gets her eyes. Catherine smiled warmly. And it's wonderful to meet the man who makes my daughter so happy. The simple, heartfelt exchange brought tears to my eyes. This was how it should have been all along. Straightforward, honest, no secrets or manipulations. As Daniel returned to oversee the cake cutting, Catherine touched my arm gently. He's handling all of this remarkably well. He's remarkable in general, I said, watching him move through the crowd. I don't know many men who would take, sorry, I just found out my parents aren't really my parents, in stride on their wedding day. When you find someone who loves you for exactly who you are, past, present, and future, you hold on to them, Catherine said softly. They're rare. I nodded, thinking of how Daniel had stood by me through this entire surreal day without a moment's hesitation or doubt. I know. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself standing between two mothers, one who had given birth to me and one who had raised me. The contrast between them was stark. Catherine, warm and open, hanging back to give me space. Margaret, rigid and controlling, inserting herself whenever possible. I had no illusions that resolving this situation would be simple or quick. There were decades of lies to unpack, relationships to redefine, boundaries to establish. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The truth, however painful, was a far stronger foundation than the elaborate fiction I'd been living in. As I bid the last guest goodbye, Daniel wrapped his arm around my waist. What now? He asked quietly. I leaned into his strength, grateful beyond words for his steady presence. Now we build something real, I said, watching as Catherine and my parents went their separate ways into the night. Something honest. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt a surge of hope for what lay ahead. The wedding day I had planned had fallen apart, but in its place was the beginning of something far more valuable, a life built on truth. The morning after my non-wedding dawned with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. Sunlight streamed through the hotel suite windows, illuminating the wedding dress hanging limply on the closet door, a beautiful relic of plans derailed. Daniel slept peacefully beside me, his presence a steady anchor in the storm that had become my life. I slipped out of bed and made coffee, my mind cycling through yesterday's revelations with newfound sobriety. The shock had receded, leaving behind a strange mix of grief and liberation. My entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies, yet paradoxically, I felt more myself than ever before. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Good morning. No pressure to respond, but I'm here when you're ready to talk more. Flying back to Boston tomorrow." The simplicity of her message, the respect for my boundaries, stood in stark contrast to the 3 missed calls from Margaret that I hadn't returned. Before I could overthink it, I texted Catherine back. "Breakfast? 10 a.m. at the hotel restaurant?" Her response was immediate. "I'll be there." Daniel stirred as I set my phone down. "Morning," he mumbled, reaching for me. "How are you feeling?" I crawled back into bed beside him, resting my head on his chest. "Like I'm in the eye of a hurricane. Calm for the moment, but aware there's more storm coming." He ran his fingers through my hair, a soothing gesture that made me close my eyes. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's what the whole marriage thing was supposed to be about anyway, right?" I smiled despite everything. "Right. So what's the plan for today?" "Breakfast with Catherine. I need to understand more about where I come from before I can figure out where I'm going." He nodded. "Want me to come along?" I considered it. "Not this time. I think I need to do this part alone." "Understood." He kissed the top of my head. "I'll check on the honeymoon arrangements. See what we can postpone without losing deposits." The practical reminder of all the wedding-related loose ends made me groan. God, I didn't even think about that. The gifts we'll have to return, the announcements we'll need to send. "Hey." Daniel sat up, taking my face in his hands. "One day at a time, okay? Today is for finding answers. We'll tackle the logistics tomorrow." His ability to compartmentalize, to break overwhelming situations into manageable pieces, was exactly what I needed. I kissed him gratefully before getting up to shower. An hour later, I sat in the hotel restaurant, nervously fidgeting with my napkin as I waited for Catherine. I'd chosen a quiet corner table, away from the bustling breakfast crowd, where we could talk without being overheard. She arrived precisely at 10, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Our eyes. Seeing her in daylight, without the high emotion of yesterday, I was struck again by our resemblance. It wasn't just our eyes or hair, it was the way she carried herself, the slight tilt of her head as she scanned the room for me. "Elena," she said warmly as she approached. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming." I gestured to the seat across from me. "I ordered coffee. I wasn't sure what you like." "Coffee is perfect." She settled in, placing her purse beside her. "How are you doing today?" That's a genuine question, not just politeness. "Honestly, I'm still processing. It feels like I'm living someone else's life." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's completely normal. Your entire foundation has been shaken. It would be strange if you weren't disoriented." A server appeared with coffee, giving us a moment to collect ourselves. After he left, I leaned forward. "I have so many questions, I don't even know where to start." "Start anywhere," Catherine said gently. "There's no right way to do this." I took a deep breath. "Tell me about the pregnancy. About when you found out about me?" A soft smile touched her lips. "I was terrified at first. I was 22, just starting my teaching career. But once the shock wore off, I was elated. I'd always wanted children, and even though the timing wasn't ideal, I loved your father. We were engaged. It felt right somehow." "And then Richard left you," I said, the anger on her behalf surprising me with its intensity. She looked down at her coffee. "Yes. His family made it very clear that a kindergarten teacher from a middle-class family wasn't Blackwood material. His father threatened to cut him off completely, not just financially, but from the family connections that were crucial for his legal career. And he chose them over you." "Over us," Catherine's expression was complicated, not bitter, but resigned. He was young and ambitious. We all make choices we later regret. She paused, though I have to believe he regrets that one deeply. Why defend him? I couldn't understand her lack of resentment. He destroyed your life. He altered my life, she corrected gently. There's a difference, and holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it. I learned that the hard way. Her wisdom humbled me. I'd been carrying my rage for less than 24 hours, and it already felt crushing. She'd lived with this betrayal for nearly 3 decades. What happened after he left? I asked. She told me then about the pregnancy, how she'd moved back home with her parents, continued teaching until she was 7 months along, prepared a nursery in their small house with second-hand furniture and handmade decorations. I used to talk to you all the time, she said, smiling at the memory. I'd tell you stories, sing songs. My mother thought I was crazy, but I wanted you to know my voice. The image of a younger Catherine, alone but determined, speaking to her unborn child, to me, brought tears to my eyes. And then the birth happened. Her face clouded. Yes, it was difficult. I hemorrhaged badly. They performed an emergency hysterectomy to save my life. She met my eyes directly. You were my only chance to have a biological child, Elena. That made losing you even more devastating. The weight of her loss hit me with full force. Not only had she lost her daughter, but any possibility of having another child. I'm so sorry, I whispered. It wasn't your fault, she said firmly. None of this was your fault. You were an innocent baby caught in adult drama. What happened when you woke up? When you found out I was gone? Pain flickered across her face. I was unconscious for 3 days. When I came to, my parents had to tell me that Richard had taken you. He had convinced the hospital staff that since he was your biological father and I was in critical condition, releasing you to him was in your best interest. But that couldn't have been legal. I protested. It wasn't. But he was a Blackwood with Blackwood lawyers. By the time I was well enough to fight, they had already filed for emergency custody. They claimed I was too ill to care for you, that the stable 2-parent home they offered was in your best interest. And the courts believed them? Catherine sighed. Courts tend to favor wealth and stability, especially back then. The Blackwoods presented themselves as the perfect family, while I was a single mother with health issues and mounting medical debt. It wasn't a fair fight. But you tried, I said, needing to hear it again. For 3 years, she confirmed. Every penny I earned went to lawyers. I took second jobs. I sold my car. My parents remortgaged their house. But each time we'd gain ground, the Blackwoods would file another motion, another delay. Their strategy was to drain me financially, and it worked. I thought about the privileged childhood I'd had, private schools, music lessons, summer camps, all funded by the family wealth that had been used to keep me from my mother. The irony was bitter. When did you give up? I asked, then immediately regretted my choice of words. I'm sorry, that's not fair. It's a valid question, she said. I signed the termination of parental rights when you were 3.5. Richard came to me with an ultimatum: sign the papers and receive a settlement that would pay off my medical debts and my parents' remortgaged house, or watch them take you out of the country where I'd never find you. He threatened to kidnap me? He didn't see it that way. In his mind, he was your father, and he was protecting you from the instability of a custody battle. That's twisted, I said, anger rising again. It was wrong, Catherine agreed. But people can justify almost anything when they believe they're acting out of love. Her ability to contextualize their actions without excusing them struck me as remarkably evolved. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them the way you have. Don't confuse understanding with forgiveness, she said carefully. I understand why they did what they did. That doesn't mean I've forgiven them for taking you from me. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. There was one question burning in my mind, but I was afraid to ask it. What is it? Catherine prompted, somehow reading my hesitation. Why didn't you try to find me when I was older, when I turned 18? Pain flashed across her face. I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. But part of the settlement agreement was that I would never contact you directly. If I violated that term, I would have to repay the entire settlement amount, money that had long since gone to medical bills and my parents' mortgage. But once I was an adult, the agreement had no expiration date, she explained. And by then your father had made it clear that if I approached you, he would tell you that I had willingly given you up for money, that I had sold you. Her voice cracked. I couldn't bear for you to believe that. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They hadn't just taken me physically. They had poisoned any possibility of a future relationship by threatening to lie about the past. How did you survive it? I asked, genuinely wondering how anyone could endure such a profound loss. One day at a time, she said simply. I focused on building a life that would make you proud if we ever met again. I went back to school, got my PhD. I threw myself into teaching, into mentoring young women. I traveled. I loved. I lived. She reached across the table, not quite touching me, but not a day went by that I didn't think of you. Impulsively, I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were warm and slightly rough, the hands of someone who worked with books and papers, so different from Margaret's perfectly manicured ones. I wish I had known, I said, all those years feeling like I didn't quite fit in my family. It would have made sense if I'd known the truth. You sensed it? She asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Not the specifics, but I always felt different, like I was playing a role in someone else's story. I squeezed her hand. I look more like you than I ever did like them. People must have noticed. Family friends used to comment, she confirmed. But your parents, the Blackwoods, would say you took after some distant relative. My Italian grandmother, I said with a hollow laugh. The one who never appeared in any family photos because she supposedly hated cameras. Catherine smiled sadly. That's quite the elaborate cover story. They maintained it for 28 years. I shook my head in disbelief. I still can't wrap my mind around that level of deception. People go to extraordinary lengths to protect the narratives they've built, Catherine said, especially when the truth would force them to confront their own moral failings. We spent the next hour trading stories. She told me about her parents, my biological grandparents, about the family medical history I should know, about traditions and traits that might explain some of my own quirks and tendencies. You get your terrible sense of direction from my father, she laughed. The man could get lost in his own neighborhood. And my love of spicy food? All me, she grinned. I put hot sauce on everything. Drove my mother crazy. Each small connection was a revelation, a piece of myself I was reclaiming. By the time we finished our second cup of coffee, I felt more grounded than I had since finding that photograph in Richard's desk. What happens now? I asked as our breakfast plates were cleared away. Catherine looked at me thoughtfully. That's entirely up to you, Elena. I would love to have a relationship with you, but I understand if you need time. This is a lot to process. I do want a relationship, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I want you in my life. The joy that bloomed across her face was breathtaking. That's more than I ever dared hope for. But, I continued, I need to deal with the Blackwoods first. This isn't just about adding you to my life. It's about redefining my relationship with the people who raised me. Of course, she nodded. Take all the time you need. I've waited 28 years. I can wait a little longer. As we prepared to leave, I had one more question. The condition you set when you signed the papers, that they tell me the truth when I was old enough, was that in writing? A slow smile spread across her face. It was. In the settlement agreement that Richard was so careful to have me sign, I have a copy in a safety deposit box in Boston. The implications hit me immediately. They're in breach of contract. Technically, yes, but Elena, her expression grew serious. Whatever you decide to do with the Blackwoods, do it for the right reasons. Not out of vengeance, but for closure. For your own peace. Her wisdom struck me again. Here was a woman who had every reason to be bitter, to want revenge, yet she was cautioning me against that very path. I'll try, I promised, though though I wasn't sure if I had her capacity for grace. Not yet, anyway. We hugged goodbye in the hotel lobby, a tentative embrace that grew stronger as we held on. "I'll call you tonight," I promised. After I talked to them, she nodded, cupping my cheek briefly before turning to leave. I watched her go, feeling both loss and discovery in equal measure. Back in our suite, I found Daniel packing up the last of our things. "How did it go?" he asked, studying my face for signs of distress. "Better than I expected," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "She's amazing, Daniel. Strong and wise and kind, despite everything they put her through." "I liked her," he said simply. "She has your resilience." I smiled at that. "Or I have hers. What's next?" I took a deep breath. I need to talk to the Blackwoods. To confront them properly, now that I've heard Catherine's side of the story. Daniel sat beside me, taking my hand. "Want me to come with you?" The offer meant everything. "Yes," I said without hesitation, "but not inside. This is something I need to do myself, but knowing you're waiting for me would help." "Then that's what I'll do." He kissed my temple. "Always." 2 hours later, we pulled up outside the Blackwood house, the home where I'd grown up, which suddenly felt foreign to me. The stately colonial, with its perfect landscaping and imposing columns, seemed like a movie set now, a facade hiding ugly truths. "I'll be right here," Daniel said as I got out of the car. "Take as long as you need." I nodded, gathering my courage as I walked up the path to the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal Margaret, her face tight with tension. "Elena," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We've been so worried. You haven't been answering our calls." "I needed time," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "Is Richard home?" "He's in the study." She hesitated. "Elena, about yesterday." "Not yet." I cut her off. "I want to talk to both of you together." She pressed her lips together but nodded, leading me to the study where Richard sat behind his desk, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He stood when I entered, hope and fear battling in his expression. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for coming." I remained standing, unwilling to settle into the familiar dynamics of this room where Richard had always held court. "I spent the morning with Catherine," I said without preamble. Their expressions tightened simultaneously. I heard her side of the story. I continued. "About how you took me when she was unconscious. About the custody battle. About the settlement and the threats." "Elena, you have to understand," Richard began, but I held up a hand. "No, you've had 28 years to speak. Now you're going to listen." The authority in my voice surprised even me. Margaret sank into a chair, while Richard remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. "What you did was wrong," I said clearly. "Not just legally, but morally. You stole a child from her mother. You used your wealth and privilege to manipulate the system. And then you lied to me for my entire life." "We were trying to protect you," Margaret insisted. "We gave you a stable home, opportunities." "At what cost?" I demanded. "Catherine lost her only chance to be a mother. I lost my identity, my heritage, half of my family history. How can you possibly justify that?" Richard's face crumpled. "We can't," he admitted, surprising me. "There's no justification, Elena. Only explanations, if you're willing to hear them." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. "When I found out Catherine was pregnant, I panicked. My father made it very clear that if I married her, I would be cut off completely, not just financially, but from the family, from the connections that would secure my future." "So you chose money over your fiancé and unborn child," I said flatly. "I chose wrong," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him. "I've regretted it every day since." "But you still took me from her when she was fighting for her life." He closed his eyes briefly. "When I heard she might not survive, I went to the hospital. And when I saw you..." His voice broke. "You were so tiny, so perfect. I knew immediately you were mine. The thought of you going into foster care while Catherine recovered, if she recovered, was unbearable. So instead of supporting her, helping her, you took advantage of her vulnerability to take me for yourself? Yes, he said simply. It was selfish and wrong. I convinced myself I was doing what was best for you, but the truth is, I wanted you. And Margaret, he glanced at his wife, she couldn't have children. The doctor had confirmed it just months before. When I told her about you, she saw it as providence. I turned to Margaret, seeing her in a new light. Is that true? You couldn't have children? Her perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. We tried for 3 years after we married. Multiple treatments, specialists. Nothing worked. Her voice was bitter. When Richard told me about you, that Catherine was in critical condition, I thought it was meant to be, that you were meant to be ours. The pain in her voice was real, but it didn't excuse what they'd done. So you took me, and then fought to keep me when Catherine recovered. We'd already bonded with you, Margaret said defensively. You were already calling me Mama. The thought of giving you up was unthinkable. Did you ever consider sharing custody? Finding a compromise that would allow Catherine to be part of my life? Richard and Margaret exchanged guilty glances. No, Richard admitted. We were afraid if she had any contact with you, she might eventually take you away completely. So instead, you erased her from my life entirely, I said, the full cruelty of their actions hitting me anew. And you violated the one condition she set when she signed away her rights, that you would tell me the truth when I was old enough. We meant to, Richard said weakly, but as time passed it became harder to imagine disrupting your life with such a revelation. That wasn't your decision to make, I said firmly. It was mine, my life, my identity, my truth. You're right, Richard conceded, surprising me again. We were wrong to keep it from you. All of it. Taking you, fighting Catherine, the lies. It was wrong. And I'm sorry, Elena. More sorry than you can ever know. The genuine remorse in his voice gave me pause. I'd come here expecting denial, justifications, perhaps even anger. Not this straightforward admission of guilt. What happens now? Margaret asked, her voice small. I took a deep breath. I don't know exactly, but things have to change. I want a relationship with Catherine. She's my biological mother, and I have 28 years of lost time to make up for. Margaret flinched visibly, but didn't argue. As for us, I continued, I need time. I can't just pretend none of this happened and go back to normal. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. We understand, Richard said, though the pain in his eyes was evident. Take all the time you need. We'll be here if you're ready to talk again. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the conversation. There's one more thing, I said, remembering Catherine's revelation about the settlement agreement. The contract Catherine signed included a condition that you would tell me the truth. You're in breach of that contract. Richard's lawyer face slipped into place. Technically, perhaps, but after so many years. I'm not threatening legal action, I interrupted. I'm simply pointing out that you've broken yet another promise. Think about that while I'm gone. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. I'm going to Boston with Daniel for a few days. I want to get to know Catherine better before she leaves for London. Elena, Margaret began, rising from her chair. I'll call when I'm ready, I said firmly. Please respect that. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the study, through the foyer, and out the front door. Each step felt like shedding a weight, like breaking free from invisible chains I hadn't even known were binding me. Daniel was waiting in the car, just as he'd promised. One look at my face told him everything he needed to know. Boston? He asked simply. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. Boston. As we drove away from the house that had never truly been mine, I realized that for the first time in my life I was making choices based on my own truth, not someone else's carefully constructed narrative. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The road ahead was uncertain. Rebuilding my identity, forging a relationship with Catherine, redefining my connection to the Blackwoods. None of it would be easy, but for the first time, it would be real. And that made all the difference. Boston welcomed me with crisp autumn air that felt like a fresh start. As Daniel and I drove from the airport to Catherine's Beacon Hill brownstone, the city's historic charm provided a fitting backdrop for the journey into my past. The narrow brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder like old friends keeping each other's secrets, their windows reflecting golden afternoon light. "Nervous?" Daniel asked, squeezing my hand across the console. "Terrified," I admitted. "But in a good way, I think." We pulled up to Catherine's address, a 3-story townhouse with a glossy blue door and window boxes still showing the last stubborn blooms of summer. Before we could even ring the bell, the door swung open, revealing Catherine with a tentative smile. "You made it," she said, her voice warm with relief. "Welcome to my home. To your home, whenever you want it to be." The simple offer of unconditional belonging brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For 3 days, we'd texted and called, cautiously building the foundation of our relationship. But stepping into her physical space, seeing the life she'd built without me, made everything more real. Inside, the house was exactly what I would have designed for myself if given the chance. Warm wood floors, walls lined with bookshelves, art that told stories rather than matched furniture. It wasn't the calculated perfection of the Blackwood house, but something more authentic and lived in. "Make yourselves comfortable," Catherine said, leading us to a cozy living room. "I'll bring some tea." As she disappeared into the kitchen, I wandered the room, drawn to the photographs arranged on a side table. Catherine receiving her doctorate. Catherine with an older couple who must have been my grandparents. Catherine laughing with friends on a hiking trail. And there, partially hidden behind the others, a small, framed image that made my heart stop. A hospital photo of a newborn, of me, with a date written in the corner that matched my birthday. "I had to bribe a nurse to get that," Catherine said softly, returning with a tray. "She took it right after you were born, before everything happened. It was the only picture I had of you for 28 years. I held it carefully, studying the tiny scrunched face that showed no hint of the chaos that would soon engulf its world. I've never seen a picture of myself as a newborn. Margaret always said they forgot to bring a camera to the hospital." "Another lie," Catherine sighed, setting down the tray. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. And anyway, we're not here to dwell on the past. We're here to build something new." Her smile brightened the room. "I'd like that very much." The next 3 days unfolded like a gift being slowly unwrapped. We talked for hours, filling in the missing pieces of each other's lives. Catherine took us on walking tours of her Boston, showing us her favorite bookstores, the coffee shop where she graded papers, the park bench where she read on summer afternoons. I met her colleagues at Wellesley, who embraced me with a warmth that suggested Catherine had spoken of me often. We visited her classroom, where Renaissance women stared down from posters on the walls, their long-forgotten art reclaimed and celebrated. "Like you," Daniel observed as we left campus, reclaiming what was lost. In the evenings, we cooked together in Catherine's kitchen, discovering shared tastes and techniques that couldn't be explained by anything but genetics. My perfect knife skills matched hers exactly, a detail that made us both laugh with delight. "Nature versus nurture," she mused as we chopped vegetables side by side. "Some things are just in the blood." On our third night, as Daniel tactfully excused himself to take a work call, Catherine and I settled on her small balcony with glasses of wine. The city lights twinkled below us like earthbound stars. "I have something for you," she said, disappearing inside only to return with a weathered journal bound in soft blue leather. "I started writing this when I was pregnant with you. I've kept it going all these years, writing letters to you that I never thought you'd read." My hands trembled as I accepted it. "You wrote to me? All this time?" She nodded, eyes bright with emotion. "On your birthdays, on milestones I imagined you might be having. First day of school, learning to drive, graduating. It was my way of staying connected to you, even when I couldn't be there." I opened the journal carefully, mindful of its age. The first entry, dated a month after she discovered her pregnancy, was written in the flowing script of a younger Catherine. To my little one, today I felt you move for the first time. Just a flutter, like butterfly wings, but I knew it was you saying hello. Tears blurred my vision as I skimmed through the pages. Years of love, poured onto paper in the desperate hope that someday, somehow, I might read them. "This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me," I whispered. "It's yours now," she said simply, "along with this." She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When I opened it, I found two tiny photographs facing each other, one of Catherine holding me as a newborn, and one of an older woman who shared our eyes. "My mother," Catherine explained. "Your grandmother. She helped me survive losing you. I want you to have something that connects us across generations." I clasped the locket around my neck, feeling its weight settle against my skin like a blessing. "Thank you." "Elena," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "There's something we need to discuss before I leave for London." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "The settlement agreement that Richard made me sign. The one they breached by not telling you the truth." She took a deep breath. "My lawyer contacted me yesterday. Apparently there's a clause that could entitle me to significant financial compensation if they violated the terms." "How significant?" "Several $1,000,000, plus interest over 28 years. She met my eyes directly. "But I won't pursue it without your blessing. This affects you, too." I considered it carefully. Part of me, the angry part that still burned with indignation at what the Blackwoods had done, wanted them to pay, literally, for their deception. But another part remembered Richard's genuine remorse, the pain in Margaret's eyes when she spoke of her infertility. "What would you do with the money?" I asked. Catherine's answer surprised me. "I'd establish a foundation for families fighting unjust custody battles. For parents like me who don't have the resources to go up against wealth and privilege in court." The righteousness of it struck me deeply. Not revenge, but restoration. Not punishment, but prevention. "Do it," I said with sudden certainty. "Not to hurt them, but to help others." "That seems like justice to me." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You have a good heart, Elena." "I like to think you got that from me." "I think I did," I smiled. "Along with my terrible sense of direction and love of spicy food." We laughed together, the sound carrying out over the Boston skyline, reaching toward stars that had witnessed the entirety of our separated lives, and now, finally, our reunion. The next morning, Daniel and I stood with Catherine at the security checkpoint in Logan Airport. Her London flight departed in an hour, the beginning of her 2-year assignment that suddenly felt both too long and not nearly as insurmountable as it would have seemed a week ago. "I've set up the guest room for you both," she said, adjusting the strap of her carry-on. "Stay as long as you like. The house is yours whenever you want it. We'll take good care of it," I promised. "And visit often. London isn't that far." "And there's FaceTime," Daniel added. "Elena already made me put all the time differences in my phone." Catherine smiled at him fondly. "Take care of each other," she said. "And Elena," her voice softened, "take care with the Blackwoods too. Whatever they did wrong, they did love you in their way." "I know," I sighed. "I'm not ready to forgive them yet, but I'm working on it, for my sake more than theirs." "That's all anyone can ask." She embraced me tightly, 28 years of lost hugs compressed into one. "I love you, my daughter." "Never doubt that." "I love you too," I whispered back, the words feeling both new and ancient on my tongue. As we watched her disappear through security, Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said, surprised to find it was true. For the first time in my life, I feel like I know who I really am. The drive back to Catherine's house, my house now, in a way, was quiet, both of us lost in thought. Daniel had been my rock through all of this, steady and supportive, without trying to influence my decisions. "Have you thought more about what you want to do about the wedding?" he asked as we turned onto Beacon Hill. I had been avoiding the question, unsure of the answer until this very moment. "I want to get married," I said decisively. Not the big production we planned before, but something simple. Something true. He smiled, relief evident in his eyes. That sounds perfect. When? Soon, I decided. Before Catherine leaves for London. She should be there. What about the Blackwoods? He asked carefully. That was the harder question, one I'd been wrestling with since our confrontation. They had raised me, however imperfectly. They had loved me, however conditionally. Could I simply cut them out of my life after 28 years? I'm not ready to have them at the wedding, I admitted. But I'm not ready to shut the door completely either. I need more time. You have all the time in the world, Daniel assured me. No one's rushing you. When we returned to the brownstone, I went straight to Catherine's study, a warm, book-lined room that felt like the heart of the house. Her desk faced a bay window overlooking a small garden, currently ablaze with fall colors. I sat in her chair, feeling a strange sense of continuity, as if I could trace the line from her to me more clearly in this space she had created. On the desk was a framed photo of her graduation day, her parents beaming proudly beside her. I had grown up with everything money could buy, but I'd missed this, the unconditional pride of a parent who saw me for exactly who I was. The Blackwoods had always seemed to love a version of me that fit their expectations, their social circle, their plans. Catherine loved me simply because I existed. With sudden clarity, I knew what I needed to do. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd avoided for days. Elena? Richard's voice was cautious, hopeful. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I'm calling because I've had time to think, and there are things I need to say. Of course, he said immediately. Whatever you need. What you and Margaret did was wrong. I began, the words I'd rehearsed in my head finally finding voice. Taking me, fighting Catherine for custody, lying to me my entire life. All of it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Yes, he agreed softly. It was. I'm not ready to forgive you, I continued. Maybe someday, but not yet. That will take time, and work on your part as much as mine. We understand, he said, though I could hear the pain in his voice. We don't deserve your forgiveness, Elena. But, I took a deep breath. You raised me. For 28 years, you were my father. Whatever your motivations, whatever your flaws, that's a reality I can't simply erase. What are you saying? He asked, a note of hope creeping into his voice. I'm saying I need space, but not permanent separation. I'm saying I'm willing to try to build something new with you and Margaret, something based on truth this time. But it has to be on my terms, and it has to include acceptance of Catherine's place in my life. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Elena, that's more than we deserve. Whatever your terms are, we'll respect them. Good, I said firmly. Because there's something else you should know. Catherine's lawyer is moving forward with a claim for breach of the settlement agreement. I heard his sharp intake of breath. I see. She's using the money to start a foundation for families fighting custody battles they can't afford. To prevent what happened to her from happening to others. That's actually quite admirable, he said after a moment, surprising me with his lack of argument. I think so too, I agreed. And I think it's the right thing, Richard. A small measure of justice after all these years. You're probably right, he conceded, again catching me off guard. I'll talk to our attorneys. We won't fight it. The Richard Blackwood I'd grown up with would never have surrendered a legal battle so easily. Perhaps he was changing too, forced to reckon with the consequences of choices made decades ago. Thank you, I said, meaning it. There's one more thing. Daniel and I are getting married next weekend. A small ceremony here in Boston, before Catherine leaves for London. I understand, he said quietly. We won't expect an invitation. Not this time, I confirmed. But that doesn't mean never. Just, not yet. After ending the call, I sat at Catherine's desk for a long while, watching the light change in the garden as afternoon drifted toward evening. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer caught in the undertow of others' decisions. I was charting my own course. Daniel found me there as dusk settled over the city. "Everything okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Getting there," I smiled. "I just talked to Richard." He raised an eyebrow. "How did that go?" "Better than expected." I stood, stretching out the stiffness from sitting too long. "I think we're all learning how to navigate this new reality." "And the wedding?" he asked, coming to take my hands in his. "Next Saturday, right here in the garden if the weather holds. Just us, Catherine, and a few close friends." He nodded approvingly. "Simple? True. Just what we wanted." "There's something else," I said, a new thought taking shape. "I want to change my name." "To Blackwood Bennett?" he guessed, referring to the hyphenation we'd discussed before. "No," I shook my head. "I want to take Catherine's last name, Miller. Elena Miller Bennett. To honor both sides of who I am." The smile that spread across his face told me he understood completely. "I think that's perfect." The week passed in a blur of simple wedding preparations, so different from the elaborate plans we'd made before. Catherine returned from London for the weekend, bringing with her a vintage lace shawl that had belonged to my grandmother. "Something old," she said, wrapping it around my shoulders the morning of the ceremony. "She would have been so proud to see you wearing it today." The garden behind the brownstone had been transformed with strings of white lights and potted chrysanthemums in shades of copper and gold. Our tiny guest list, just 10 people in total, gathered on white folding chairs as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the brick patio. Daniel waited beside the justice of the peace, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a simple charcoal suit. Catherine stood in the front row, radiant in a deep blue dress that brought out our shared eyes. As the first notes of a string quartet floated through the garden, I took a deep breath and began my walk down the short aisle alone. There was no one giving me away this time. I was giving myself freely and completely to the future I had chosen. Daniel's face lit up as our eyes met, and in that moment, all the chaos of the past months seemed worth it. We had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger on the other side. "Dearly beloved," the justice began, her voice warm and steady. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Elena and Daniel." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, stripped of pretension and focused entirely on the commitment we were making to each other. When it came time for the vows, I squeezed Daniel's hands and spoke from the heart. "Daniel, when everything I thought I knew about myself was thrown into question, you were my constant. You stood beside me while I pieced together my fractured identity, never pushing, never judging, just loving me through all of it. I promise to do the same for you, to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes next with the same courage and grace you've shown me. I love you, and I choose you, today and always." Tears shimmered in his eyes as he spoke his own vows, promising to build a life with me based on honesty, respect, and unwavering support. When we exchanged rings, simple platinum bands that matched the new simplicity of our lives, they felt like symbols of something far more genuine than the elaborate ceremony we'd originally planned. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice concluded. "You may kiss the bride." As Daniel's lips met mine, applause erupted from our small gathering. Catherine was the first to embrace me afterward, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. "My beautiful daughter," she whispered. "I never thought I'd see this day." The reception was as intimate as the ceremony. Dinner at a long table in Catherine's dining room, filled with laughter, toasts, and the warm glow of newfound family. As the evening wound down, Daniel pulled me onto the small patio for a private dance under the string lights. "Happy?" he asked, holding me close as we swayed to music only we could hear. "Beyond happy," I assured him. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely authentic. No secrets, no pretense, just me." "Elena Miller Bennett," he tested the name, smiling. "It suits you. It feels right," I agreed. Like I've finally claimed all the pieces of myself. Over his shoulder, I could see Catherine through the window, laughing with our friends, belonging completely in the tableau of our wedding day. The sight filled me with a satisfaction so profound it bordered on joy. Later that night, after our guests had departed and Daniel had fallen asleep, I sat at Catherine's desk again, this time with her blue journal open before me. I turned to the first blank page and picked up a pen. "Dear Catherine," I wrote, my heart full. "Today I became a wife, but I also became a daughter, your daughter, in a way that finally feels complete and true." I wrote everything I couldn't quite say aloud yet, about the gratitude I felt for her strength, her grace, her willingness to welcome me without reservation, despite all she had suffered, about how her genes lived on in me, in my laugh, my determination, my love of spicy food, and inability to follow directions, about how I planned to honor her sacrifice by living authentically, by never settling for comfortable lies over difficult truths. As I closed the journal, a sense of completion washed over me. The journey wasn't over. I still had work to do with the Blackwoods, wounds that needed healing, relationships that needed rebuilding. But for the first time, I was walking a path of my own choosing, with my eyes wide open. 6 months later, I stood at the arrivals gate at Logan Airport, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Daniel waited beside me, holding a welcome sign that made me both laugh and tear up. The Miller Bennetts and the Blackwoods. Richard spotted us first, raising a hand in tentative greeting as he and Margaret approached. They looked older, somehow, as if the weight of their secrets had aged them beyond their years. Behind them came Catherine, returning from London for her first visit since the wedding. The moment could have been awkward, even volatile. My biological mother and the couple who had taken me from her, meeting face to face for the first time in decades. But as they drew near, something unexpected happened. Catherine stepped forward, her hand extended toward Margaret. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "It means a lot to Elena." Margaret hesitated only briefly before taking the offered hand. "Thank you for inviting us," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically humble. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't even reconciliation in any meaningful sense. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that the past, however painful, was shared, and that the future, however uncertain, could be navigated together for my sake. As we walked toward the exit, I found myself in the middle, Catherine on one side, Margaret and Richard on the other, Daniel slightly ahead. My complete family, fractured and imperfect, but finally honest. "Ready for this weekend?" Daniel asked, glancing back at me with a supportive smile. I nodded, thinking of the plans we'd made. A dinner tonight at our new apartment, brunch tomorrow at a neutral restaurant, perhaps a walk through the public garden if the weather held. Small steps toward a new kind of relationship, one based on truth rather than deception. Ready, I confirmed, realizing as I said it that I truly was. The journey of discovering my true identity had begun with 3 devastating words at my wedding: "You're not my daughter." But it had led me to a truth far more powerful than any lie. That family isn't defined by blood alone, or by perfect facades maintained at any cost. True family is built on honesty, on acceptance, on the courage to face difficult truths and grow from them. As we stepped out into the Boston sunshine, I touched the silver locket that still hung around my neck, connecting me to generations of strong women who had faced their own challenges with grace. I was Elena Miller Bennett now, daughter, wife, and finally, completely myself. And in that authenticity, I had found the greatest gift of all, the freedom to write my own story on my own terms, with all the complicated, beautiful truth that entailed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.